Trump's former campaign lawyer turned disqualified U.S. Attorney John Sarcone has been found to have committed professional misconduct. That was the decree by the Attorney Grievance Committee of the New York State Judiciary, in particular, the Appellate Division, 3rd Judicial Department. And they found in a letter, please be advised that pursuant to the rules for attorney disciplinary matters, after deliberation, the committee determined there was a sufficient basis for a finding of professional misconduct and took appropriate action, end quote. Today on All Rise News and Legal AF, we're going to dissect that line, what it says and what it doesn't say, in the history of John Sarcone, who tried in his brief tenure before he was disqualified as a U.S. attorney for the Northern District of New York to gin up an investigation of New York Attorney General Letitia James before that collapsed after a federal judge ruled that he was unlawfully appointed and his subpoenas must be quashed. Welcoming on the show right now is the executive director for the Campaign for Accountability that filed the complaint against John Sarcone. It's her victory today, Michelle Kuppersmith. Michelle, welcome once again on to All Rise News and Legal AF.
Thanks for having me back, Adam.
Tell me your reaction to hearing this from the Attorney Grievance Committee, that John Sarcone committed professional misconduct.
Well, if you want to hear what I actually thought, it was, holy shit, they actually did something, finally. It was actually a really thrilling moment when this letter landed in my inbox. And despite what it says on the actual letter, we only got it like this week. So it was exciting. We've had this sort of concern that bars were not going to take action against sitting Trump attorneys. But, John Sarcone, despite no longer being the acting U.S. attorney for the Northern District of New York, is still in that office. So he's one of I think the first, if not the first, lawyer that a bar has taken, at least some sort of action against while they were still employed by the federal government.
And you're right. That is such a watershed because, as you mentioned, your group in particular and others have been filing bar complaints that have been either slow walked or ignored by many bar committees. And yet there's something very mysterious about this particular letter. They do find that John Sarcone committed professional misconduct, that there's a sufficient basis to find that. But they don't say in this letter what that misconduct was or what the discipline was. What did your complaint allege that he did that led to this action?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, the crux of it is that we allege that John Sarcone lied about, if your viewers remember, we talked about this, I think, back in October, that he had obfuscated a scenario that he was part of with a man who was walking alongside a hotel where Sarcone was smoking a cigar outside. And this is all caught on tape, by the way. And Sarcone alleged that this man lunged at him with a knife, but the videotape shows totally different story, that Sarcone actually kind of followed him as this man was leaving the scene of whatever verbal altercation they might have had. And he then, we have Sarcone himself admitted that he then called up his, buddy, his buddy in the police department, the prosecutor's office, and was like, hey, this thing happened. And he submitted sworn affidavits about what went down, and they were just totally false according to the video. I think you've shown your viewers this. And so we were alleging, this guy lied. And as we are saying today, he's an officer of the court, right? It really doesn't matter how he presents himself and the words that he says. That we were saying this violated all the rules that lawyers are supposed to follow in the state of New York.
Right. And it's not just what he said. He had brought, through his referral and on his public statement about this, charges of attempted murder that collapsed as soon as that video was released. Isn't that right?
Right. Yeah. That's how he sort of, induced his buddies in the local law enforcement to do that. And then they had to retract it, basically. And the guy who he was alleging was doing these crimes was led away with a legitimate slap on the wrist, because he didn't really do anything according to the actual proof.
This was such a crazy scandal when it broke out in Albany, New York. The local papers found out that in his police report, he listed an address, and that address was tied to a boarded up home. Can you recount that part?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. So, part of the rules are if you're serving as the U.S. attorney of a district, you actually need to live in the district. And we think that Sarcone actually lives in, Westchester somewhere for us New Yorkers, not upstate. Well, I guess we can debate that, but I would consider that not upstate, not in the Albany region, not in the Northern District of New York. And so Sarcone had listed this address of like you said, a boarded up building, and local press reached out to him and he said, no, I live on the second floor, but it was very, very clear there'd been like building permits. It was obviously not an occupied building. And Sarcone had ties to the owner from his past legal work. So it was pretty obvious to us that Sarcone was actually staying in the hotel where he was smoking the cigar and not living in that boarded up home that, local press found to be pretty much abandoned.
So as I had mentioned earlier, Sarcone was disqualified as U.S. Attorney for the Northern District of New York. Mm-hmm. What is he up to today?
He's still there. I mean, not in that same role, but he's now the first assistant in the Northern District of New York. So he's actually still working on these cases concerningly, right? Because now we're finding out that the bar found that he did do something wrong. Like you said earlier, we don't know exactly what, but they determined he did wrong. But we will go through whatever we can to try to unseal or to reveal what the bar committee decided. We're going to use all tools that we have at our disposal, and because the people deserve to know, right? This is a federal prosecutor. He's a high-ranking federal prosecutor.
Right. And as you put it in your press statement, he was given a secret slap on the wrist. Can you speak about the importance of some transparency here about discipline and what he was disciplined for?
Of course, because as I said, John Sarcone is putting cases forth in front of federal courts. Every judge should know what John Sarcone did and what the bar thought that he did wrong, right? And so we are seeing this as a pattern, right? That Trump administration lawyers are lying to judges. I'm not making, that's not my opinion. Judges are saying that in their, responses to arguments from Trump administration lawyers. And so I think that John Sarcone fits into that, potentially into that pattern. We don't have, proof yet that he has lied in cases that he's presenting, not away from this one, right? But it shows a potential pattern that we think that all judges and other, attorneys that are going against the Northern District should know about. And so we think it's of utmost importance for the bar to release disciplinary history and put that on its public website. If you ever look up an attorney in most states, it'll say disciplinary history, yes, no. And if it's yes, there's some sort of description. Right now, as far as we know, it says no for John Sarcone. So that's why we're calling it a secret slap on the wrist.
And that's what's so surprising to me as I read this letter. You have, we've seen Rudy Giuliani face public discipline. We've seen John Eastman face public discipline. And in all of the aftermath of the 2020 election and the attacks on the election, we've seen a public reckoning over these events. Have you ever seen this kind of degree of confidentiality over a finding of misconduct and discipline related to it?
I think it's uncommon because, as you said, we know about these other attorneys who have been caught up in, misconduct, malpractice, et cetera. We know what it is. So we really are calling on the bar to release that information. We don't really understand why it should be confidential. It's incumbent upon anyone who is, engaging with John Sarcone and just the general public. Like I said, he's a federal prosecutor. He's paid by our tax dollars. We should know.
Right. And this is clearly a big breakthrough for your group, Campaign for Accountability. You have gotten some of the accountability that you have been looking for in an environment where state bars across the country are facing pressure from the Trump administration not to take action against their lawyer. Can you describe that climate?
Yeah. So we've talked about the bond suppression rule that is proposed. I think there were over 1 million comments that were submitted about that rule, which is an incredibly large number. Our Campaign for Accountability did submit a comment against that rule, of course. what I say is that, I'm very, very glad that the bar here did do something. I don't want to discount that they did have some sort of accountability for John Sarcone. And I think that it should be a message to other bars that you don't need to be afraid, right? Like, this is possible. Doing your job is the right thing to do. It is possible. And it's what we want. It's what Americans want.
At 1 million comments. Until you said that right now, I did not realize that was the size of the reaction. If folks ever, look at the Federal Register or have ever entered a comment on the Federal Register, sometimes you see hundreds of comments. On major campaigns, you'll see thousands or tens of thousands. 1 million is on a different level. So what do you think that suggests about the public paying attention and demanding accountability?
Yeah, I think that we are all thirsty. We are hungry for accountability from these, civic organizations that have the ability to do accountability. Most of us don't, right? Most of us we want something to happen, but we don't really have the ability to. So that outpouring of opposition to a rule that's trying to tamp down on like the small level of accountability that we do, occasionally have in our lives, that shows that we want it. We're thirsty. We want it.
And so tell folks if folks are seeking accountability, particularly among Trump lawyers and the actions that are being taken by that agency, how do they find out more about and support the work of your organization?
Of course, the best way is to sign up for our newsletter on campaignforaccountability.org. We also have a tip line there if you want to submit something to us. And you can find us on X at accountable_org.
Thanks so much, Michelle, for joining once again.
Thanks, Adam.
And for folks who want to find out more about this and other breaking news, take a moment to visit www.allrisenews.com or All Rise News on Substack. If you become a free or paid subscriber, you support the work that I'm doing, diving into these stories. And take a moment right now to subscribe to Legal AF.
Can't get your fill of Legal AF? Me neither. That's why we formed the Legal AF Substack. Every time we mention something in a hot take, whether it's a court filing or a oral argument, come over to the Substack. You'll find the court filing and the oral argument there, including a daily roundup that I do called, wait for it, Morning AF. What else? All the other contributors from Legal AF are there as well. We got some new reporting. We got interviews. We got ad-free versions of the podcast and hot takes. Where? Legal AF on Substack. Come over now to free subscribe.